New Labour Revolution, coming soon to BBC Two and iPlayer.
Today at 6, two more energy firms collapse, the latest casualties of the spike in wholesale gas prices. As firms go to the wall, millions of customers are left looking for new suppliers, and the regulator warns the worst isn't over.
We are in unprecedented cost territory, and I'm afraid, there are many, many factors that have contributed to that. So it's very, very hard to predict how long that will last.
As energy and food costs are set to rise, we'll take a look at the wider cost of living. Also on the programme, the catalogue of errors that led to hundreds of thousands of women losing out on pension payments. India's love affair with coal, the environmental costs of the country's huge appetite for the fossil fuel. And the return of fans cheering on their football teams while standing on the terraces.
Coming up in Sports Day, later in the hour on the BBC News channel, we'll head live to Wisconsin, where Ian Poulter is hoping to make some more magical Ryder Cup memories.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Two more UK energy suppliers have gone out of business as rising gas prices put pressure on the market. The firms Green and Avro Energy announced late this afternoon that they'd cease trading. Between them, they supplied more than 800,000 customers. 6 companies have collapsed in recent days, but the boss of the energy regulator, Ofgem, is warning more firms could go, with the number of customers who will eventually need new suppliers running into millions. With the very latest, here's our Consumer Affairs correspondent, Coletta Smith.
Two more energy firms have collapsed. As Avro and Green call in the administrators, that clocks up a total of 6 energy companies folding within the last fortnight. The industry called for help, but the government says they won't bail out suppliers in trouble.
In the first instance, the industry has to look to itself. And as you said at the beginning of your question, where I stand in these issues. I do not believe that it is responsible government to put taxpayers' money to companies that are run. So that means that I don't think we should be rewarding failure.
We're now seeing the result of that decision, with a number of other providers teetering on the brink. More than 1 million customers are now being switched to a new provider, but they're facing the prospect of being charged more. Robert was with a supplier who went bust a few months ago, so he was automatically transferred.
Fortunately for me, I froze for 2 years the price I pay. I just think it's shocking that a lot of people on probably relatively low incomes, it's going to be such a big factor over the winter.
Those being moved to a new supplier may be charged at a higher rate, which Sarah doesn't think is fair.
It would be better if they did alternative plans or caps. Nobody wants the energy prices going up, do they? So don't really try and think about it much, otherwise it would probably stress me out.
There's no comfort for customers from the regulator. They think it's likely that more firms could collapse in the coming weeks.
We are in unprecedented cost territory, and I'm afraid, there are many, many factors that have contributed to that, including an increased international demand, potentially some restrictions around supply. So it's very, very hard to predict how long that will last.
In the last 24 hours, the government has agreed to pay tens of millions of pounds to fix one corner of this crisis. After panic from meat and drinks producers, a deal was reached to get carbon dioxide production going again at a major plant in Teesside. Even though fizz is back on tap for the next couple of weeks anyway, the underlying issue that caused those carbon dioxide plants to be turned off is that energy is so expensive, and that problem hasn't been fixed yet. We're all facing a more expensive winter. Energy bosses say the situation is out of their hands.
The real worry is that the sector is so fragile as a whole that players that might be expected to pick up customers are worried about doing so because of the cost of doing it. There's no cash down the back of the sofa anywhere.
As the gas price spike claims more companies, it's the customers who can afford it the least who will be hit the hardest as the bills rack up this winter. Coletta Smith, BBC News.
Well, the hike in gas prices means eventually a likely rise in energy and food bills, along with impending tax increases and the planned reduction in universal credit. The cost of living for millions will be badly affected in the coming months. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has sent us this report from Stoke-on-Trent.
At this community garden, they care about health and well-being. Families and volunteers growing fresh food, particularly useful, perhaps, given there is worry about prices.
At the weekly shop, it's gone up about £15 to £25 a week. You just have to cut costs other places, don't you, like rob Peter to pay Paul.
People here say they are managing, but talk of rising bills is causing concern.
At my age, I shouldn't really be worrying about the cost of a shower. I don't think it will be on Boris's agenda to look at his thermostat, will it, when he goes home at night?
It is terrifying going into winter and not knowing how much fuel prices are going to rise and how much inflation might affect mortgage rates and things.
Still famous for its pottery, Stoke-on-Trent was an industrial hub that has faced economic struggle. One local MP who was in Westminster today told me she's worried about a tough winter, but hopes it will be short-lived as the economy picks up post-pandemic.
I'm upbeat about the future for the city, but in the meantime, we will undoubtedly have a few tough months ahead. I'm confident for the most vulnerable that there will be help available.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is, though, fast becoming a political battle line, with Labour claiming families face a perfect storm.
Universal credit down £1,000, rent up £150, gas bills up £150.
The government points to measures to help, including a cap on energy prices.
We're providing seasonal cold weather payments to eligible claimants, an extra £25 a week during colder periods. On top of that, we're giving a winter fuel payment to recipients of the state pension. But the crucial thing, Mr. Speaker, is that we've got rising employment and rising wages, and that will benefit everyone in Scotland and across the UK.
Back in Stoke-on-Trent, the economy is clearly moving again.
The government did put billions of pounds of support in place during the pandemic, which it says can't keep going indefinitely. The problem is some of that's being withdrawn just as households are facing higher bills. And even some Conservative MPs are worried about the consequences if people feel worse off.
Carol's one of those set to lose £20 a week from her universal credit payments, something she's relied on since her husband Alan died in April.
Why should you, in this day and age, when you've worked hard all your life, have to sit in your living room with blinking cardigans, coats and blankets round your shoulders because you can't afford to keep warm? It's not on, it's not right.
Carol says her network of family and friends will keep her going. The question, what's the personal price and political cost if others end up struggling? Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Stoke-on-Trent.
President Biden has played down the chances of a post-Brexit free trade deal between America and the UK as he held talks with Boris Johnson at the White House. He said he'd discuss the issue a little bit with the Prime Minister, but added we're going to have to work it through. Tonight, Mr. Johnson will address the UN General Assembly in New York, from where our political editor Laura Koonsberg reports.
The most solemn dedication of the pact that spans the Atlantic. Lives lost side by side. Memories fade, maybe. But what shape does a 21st century relationship take?
Ask him a question.
It does not now, mean a trade deal, promised when a very different president sat in that cream armchair. The White House still dangles cooperation, but a big pact is not in sight.
Well, we're going to talk about trade a little bit today, and we're going to have to work that through.
A moment to strike political poses on Capitol Hill too, and exports of British lamb are set to be back on DC's menu. But ministers have even been considering trying to pursue trade ties through different routes. Relations seem friendly enough, yet the Prime Minister admits now progress to a bigger deal is at a slower pace.
What we're wanting to do is make solid incremental steps on trade. The Biden administration is not doing free trade deals around the world right now, but I've got absolutely every confidence that a great deal is there to be done, and there are plenty of people in that building behind me who certainly want to do well.
Downing Street maintains the relationship has made great strides forward, but the disappearing deal hasn't gone unnoticed.
Can I begin by offering my commiserations to the Prime Minister after he flew away to the US and made absolutely zero progress on the trade deal that he promised us.
Boris Johnson didn't come here this week expecting to get on the plane home with a huge trade deal signed, sealed and delivered. But in these last few days, the reality has truly kicked in. That prize promised with Brexit is just not a priority for this White House. For Downing Street, though, this visit has still been a success, with progress on security, particularly on climate change, and a growing connection between the two men.
The relationship between a Prime Minister and an American President, central to any government. Partnerships that can disappoint or delight, but always defines. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Washington, D.C.
And President Biden is asking world leaders to pledge to vaccinate 70% of the world's population against COVID-19 by September next year. At a virtual summit, he said America would buy an additional 500 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine to donate to poor countries. But research shows richer nations still have a surplus of vaccines, some of which is reaching its use-by date. Our health editor Hugh Pym has more details.
Wealthier nations are pushing on with booster jabs, but it's a different story in low-income countries in Africa and around the world, where vaccination rates are much lower. That divergence has been criticised by the World Health Organization, and there have been growing calls for more vaccine doses to be diverted to those most in need.
They were going to come together and they were going to attack the problem.
A leading advocate for vaccine supplies to Africa said action was needed by the richest nations.
Promises do not translate into vaccines and jabs in people's arms. Commitments are not jabs in people's arms. People are dying for want of a vaccine. I spoke at the WHO meeting, and on that same day, a member of my household had just died, a 30-year-old woman, because she was unvaccinated.
New research suggests that by the end of this year, there'll be around 1 billion surplus vaccine doses in the G7 group of the wealthiest nations, including the UK and the European Union. Of those, around 100 million doses will be past their use-by date by December. As of now, estimates vary, but it's thought that only around 3% of the population of Africa have been fully vaccinated.
That's simple waste. People hate waste. Lives could be saved as a result of having these vaccines for there to be hundreds.
The former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, now WHO Ambassador for Health Financing, says shifting vaccines is in everyone's interest.
If the disease spreads in Africa and in low-income countries, and if it mutates and there are new variants, it's going to come back to haunt even the fully vaccinated here. Nobody's safe until everybody's safe.
The G7 summit in Cornwall in June pledged 1 billion doses to poor countries as a big step towards vaccinating the world, but critics say the process has moved too slowly. Today, President Biden at a COVID-19 virtual summit promised to double the US contribution.
This is a global tragedy, and we're not going to solve this crisis with half measures or middle-of-the-road ambitions. We need to go big.
But will a pledge to go big actually deliver? African countries and others will want to see vaccine supplies arriving at a faster rate before passing judgment. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Here, the government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were nearly 34,500 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means in the past week there was an average of 31,635 new cases per day. There were just over 7,500 people in hospital with COVID, according to the latest data. Another 166 deaths have been recorded. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test, taking the average number per day in the last week to 139. On vaccinations, just under 90% of people aged 16 and over have had their first jab, while 82% are now double vaccinated. A 31-year-old man has appeared before magistrates in Derby charged with the murders of 3 children and a woman. Their bodies were found at a house in Killamarsh near Sheffield on Sunday. Damien Bendall was remanded in custody and will appear at Derby Crown Court on Friday. Now, years of repeated human errors and outdated IT systems have resulted in more than 100,000 women being underpaid £1 billion of state pensions. A report into failures at the Department for Work and Pensions found systematic problems dating back to the 1980s. Some affected women are due six-figure sums. Here's Sarah Corker.
I feel very let down. It doesn't give you much faith in the system.
For nearly a decade, Irene from Worcestershire was underpaid her state pension. She raised her concerns with the Department for Work and Pensions, but was repeatedly told everything was correct. But it wasn't. She was in fact owed more than £7,000.
If we hadn't have been persistent, we wouldn't have got anywhere. So I urge people, you know, if they think they've got a shortfall, keep on with it, don't be fobbed off.
Irene has now got the money, but it was a fight, and she's far from alone.
Under special rules for married women, those who had small state pensions in their own right could get better payouts based on their husband's contributions. But errors at the DWP meant that for decades they were underpaid. Some are owed six-figure sums.
The errors date back to 1985, affecting an estimated 134,000 pensioners, including some married women, widows and the over 80s. They are collectively owed more than £1 billion. The National Audit Office found there were repeated human errors over many years at the Department for Work and Pensions, blamed on complex pension rules and unautomated, outdated IT systems. It was a former pensions minister who first revealed the scale of the problem.
For decades, the Department for Work and Pensions simply failed. They failed to spot that over 100,000 women were being paid the wrong rate of pension. Someone in the department should have been more curious. When errors were found, they should have asked if something systematic was going on.
Some women will now be fully repaid, but others, like Jan in Fife, can only backdate claims for 12 months. And that's because of when her husband retired. She believes she is still owed £17,000.
At 80 years old, you get fed up with it, and that's why I think a lot of people just gave up. But I haven't given up. I've been like a dog with a bone. I just won't give up because it's wrong.
The DWP said it is fully committed to ensuring the historical errors made by successive governments are corrected. A team of 500 civil servants is now working to trace the women, and Jan says some of her friends have already died waiting for the money they're owed. Sarah Corker, BBC News.
It's 17 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. And two more energy firms supplying hundreds of thousands of customers have gone bust. The regulator warns more could follow.
On the day that trials of safe standing in football have been announced, I'm at Chelsea Football Club, where some fans have told me they want their club to be an early adopter.
Coming up in Sports Day in the next 15 minutes on the BBC News channel, Derby sink to the bottom of the Championship after a 12-point deduction for going into administration. But the future could be bleaker for the former champions of England.
It's less than 6 weeks before Glasgow hosts the crucial climate conference known as COP26, and one of its goals will be to persuade industrialised nations to phase out their dependence on coal. Overnight, China promised to stop funding coal-fired power projects abroad, but many economies around the world are still dependent on the fossil fuel, like India, where new plants continue to be built. So how do fast-developing nations satisfy their demand for energy while trying to curb emissions? Well, our correspondent, Rajini Vaidyanathan, has sent us this report from one of India's largest coal-producing regions.
India's coal belt helps power this vast nation. More than 2/3 of the country's energy production still depends on it. Such is the demand that the country's planning on building or expanding dozens of mines in the coming years, and also continues to import coal. There's pressure on India to reduce its emissions, but cutting coal use is a tricky balance. A major pollutant in the country, the dirtiest of fuels, coal is also a major source of jobs in these communities, which are some of India's poorest.
India cannot live without coal. Our country is a developing country. Coal is one of the major resources for Indians. If we stop the coal production under the pressure of the world community, then how can we maintain our livelihood?
And how can India meet the energy needs of a population of more than 1.3 billion? A growing middle class is driving that demand, although the average Indian still uses far less energy than the average Brit or American. India is already shifting to cleaner sources like solar. Experts say the country needs more investment to make the switch to renewables.
India has already set out some of the most aggressive renewable energy targets in the world. The more rapidly we can get more investment, more capital, more money into solar, wind, bioenergy and so forth, the quicker we can keep shifting away from the older energy infrastructure.
But making that shift means reaching communities like these, where the oldest and most basic forms of energy are the only option. Jamuna is one of the tens of millions of Indians who still don't have access to power. There's no electricity, there's no water. If we don't have coal, we can't cook. If it's harmful, what can we do about it? She tells me. We have no other option. At night we burn coal and keep it in the house, so we also have some light. What people here want so badly is what so many in the West have long taken for granted. In India, progress comes at a price. It means cutting the cord with coal could take time. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Orissa.
The government has won a High Court ruling which means climate change protesters could be jailed if they continue a campaign of disruption on the M25. The Insulate Britain group has blocked parts of the busy motorway surrounding Greater London 5 times in the past 2 weeks. The Department for Transport says more than 200 campaigners have been arrested at the protests. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has paid tribute to a primary school teacher found dead in a park in Greenwich. Police say Sabina Nessa, who was 28 and from Kidbrooke, was murdered. Her body was discovered on Saturday. Here's Lauren Moss.
A community in shock at the death of another young woman on the streets of London. Sabina Nessa's body was discovered in Cater Park in Kidbrooke on Saturday afternoon. Members of her family came to lay flowers and remember the primary school teacher they say had a beautiful soul.
She honestly was the most caring person, kindest, sweetest girl you can meet. Sabina's heart was as good as gold. She'd never have a bad thing to say about anyone. Her sisters are going to miss her so much.
Detectives believe Sabina was attacked almost 24 hours before her body was found at 8:30 on Friday night, minutes from her home. A post-mortem examination was inconclusive. Police and Sabina's family are appealing for anyone with information to come forward.
For the sake of humanity, for the sake of, women, children, daughters, sisters, this is a heinous crime.
A man in his 40s arrested on suspicion of murder has been released pending further inquiries. Police met with residents today who are concerned for their own safety. Patrols will be stepped up as the investigation continues. Lauren Moss, BBC News.
The number of people having a baby with a surrogate mother in England and Wales has almost quadrupled in the last decade. Research by Kent University and the Surrogacy Matching Agency shows applications for court orders which transfer rights from the surrogate to the intended parents increased from 117 in 2011 to 413 last year. With more, here's Helena Wilkinson.
Counting down the weeks until their baby boy is due.
Oh, look.
Sam and Guy turned to surrogacy after finding out Sam couldn't carry a pregnancy herself.
After a particularly bad miscarriage, I was then diagnosed with breast cancer. We got through the treatment, the diagnosis, prognosis, all good. But at the end of that, we kind of knew that that was the end of the journey for having a family too.
We were really fortunate that the cancer was caught early. It wasn't long after that we realised that surrogacy could be an option.
Hiya there, how are you both doing today?
Within a few months of joining a non-profit organisation, the couple were matched with their surrogate, Miranda. The 3 of them have become close, meeting up regularly and speaking most days. Miranda has 2 children of her own. She's wanted to be a surrogate since she was 18.
It feels amazing to finally make my dreams a reality and do something I've always wanted to do.
just seeing the support of my friends and my family throughout the whole process, it really makes me feel humbled, and to be around such amazing people that have made my dream a reality.
When a baby is born to a surrogate, they are deemed the legal mother under UK law. It's not until a parental order is issued that legal parentage is transferred. It's also illegal to advertise for a surrogate, meaning intended parents can struggle to find a match. Experts say the law is outdated and it leaves both surrogates and intended parents vulnerable.
We have consulted on introducing a new pathway for surrogacy, under which the intended parents would be the legal parents of the child as soon as the child is born, unless the surrogate objects to them being the legal parents.
As Sam and Guy prepare for the arrival of their baby, they hope the process will become more accessible for others. The government has asked the Law Commission of England and Wales, along with the Scottish Law Commission, to review surrogacy legislation and prepare a draft bill, which, if passed, will change the law. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News.
Some football fans will be able to stand at Premier League and Championship games from January under a pilot scheme. It will be the first time supporters won't have to be seated while watching top-flight matches since reforms that followed the Hillsborough disaster of 1989. Well, Laura Scott is live at Chelsea's Stamford Bridge ground for us this evening. Evening, Laura.
Evening, Clive. Well, yes, several leading clubs, including Chelsea behind me, have been future-proofing their stadia to make sure they were ahead of the game in case safe standing is introduced in the future. And the majority of fans I've spoken to tonight are in favour of safe standing, saying that it would create a better atmosphere, create more choice for fans, and that it might actually be safer for those who want to sit or stand. But this is an emotive subject. For more than 25 years, a blanket ban on standing at football matches has been in place in the top two divisions in England and Wales. The reality, though, is that persistent standing has become a common sight at grounds. While Premier League club bosses met today, the significant but seemingly surprising announcement came of a trial of safe standing. What do you think of safe standing?
Great, it's brilliant.
Terrific idea.
Would you be in favour of being an early adopter at Aston Villa?
Yes, I might be.
Premier League and Championship clubs have been invited to sign up to pilots beginning in January. Campaigners called this a vital step.
For us, today is an outbreak of common sense. It's a real step forward and a return to the way that things should have been.
But what do the fans think?
Been before where they have terrace in rugby, and it's much more of a good atmosphere and you can fit a few more people in.
You just get a better view, really, and a better atmosphere for the game.
The existing policy mandating all-seater stadia was introduced in 1994 following the Hillsborough disaster, which led to the deaths of 97 Liverpool fans. Louise, whose brother Andrew was one of the victims, said she supported the move.
There are a few things I'm a little bit concerned about, but, ultimately I'm very, very pleased, and I just want every football fan to be safe. That's my priority.
Several clubs have already expressed a desire to engage with the trials. If they go well, there could be lasting change on the horizon. Laura Scott, BBC News.
Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Philip Avery. Hi there.
Hi Clive, nice evening at the bridge, as indeed it was for farming today across a good part of Lincolnshire. Not just Lincolnshire, but go too far north. Oh my word, what a difference here. This is the central belt of Scotland. Far too close to this weather front. A great banner of cloud there draped none too decorously across Scotland, Northern Ireland, producing some rainfall as we've seen from our weather watcher picture. And that front will spend the rest of the night easing its way down across the border and into the north of England to the north of Wales. To the south of that, the cloud may break, but most temperatures staying in double figures. To the north of it, my word, a lot of showers, if not longer spells of rain, and also a very significant wind, a disruptive wind perhaps across Shetland, where some of the gusts could easily get up to around 65 miles an hour. That's tied in with a very vigorous area of low pressure, which is going to be around to start off Thursday, close to the northeast of Scotland. Notice the squeeze on the isobars, indication of that very strong wind indeed. And following on the more northerly weather feature, the northern front there, it could well turn really quite cool for a time as well. But elsewhere, a mild start to the day, rather claggy one across Wales and the southwest, the odd spot of drizzle from the old front. This more northerly feature here loops back towards the western side of Scotland through the day, so bits and pieces of rain and drizzle there. But after that dull start across parts of Wales, I think Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia and parts of eastern England, 22, 23 degrees underneath pretty clear skies. But further north, always that little bit cooler, at least during the course of Thursday. But Thursday into Friday, we put a swathe of mild air right back across the British Isles, moisture laden, so some of the western hills of Scotland again seeing a wee bit of rain or drizzle, but keep some sunnier skies about you. And again, you could be looking at temperatures easily close to 22 or 23. Clive.
OK, Philip, thanks for that. Now a reminder of our top story. 2 more energy firms supplying hundreds of thousands of customers have gone bust. The regulator warns more could follow. And that's it. Now on BBC One, let's join our news teams where you are. Have a very good evening.